Can we talk about the quiet gaps screens have created? Our kids can build entire digital worlds, but struggle to read the room. And no, this isn't about demonizing screens. They're not evil, but they are passive. Social skills, executive functioning, those are not passive. They're built, practiced, strengthened. That's why I love social thinking, because this isn't just be nice advice. It teaches kids how social communication actually works, how to notice what others are thinking, manage impulses, join conversations appropriately, and respond instead of react. And here's the part parents don't always realize. It also builds executive functioning, organization, flexible thinking, time management, problem solving. These are classroom survival skills, friendship skills, life skills. If screens have taken some of those practice reps, we can build them back intentionally. Check out social thinking in the show notes, and let's raise kids who can navigate people and not just platforms. If you are trying to pull your kids away from screens without triggering a full-blown household uprising, I have something that actually works in my house. My son and I are obsessed with the games from Taco Cat Games. We especially love their very popular Taco Cat Goat Cheese Pizza. I am not kidding when I say every family we've given it to comes back saying the same thing. This game is chaos in the best possible way. It's ridiculously easy to learn, the rounds are super fast, and within about 10 minutes, your living room turns into a laugh until you cannot breathe, slap the table competition. And for ADHD brains, it's perfect. Quick feedback, constant engagement, lots of movement, all the things that keep kids actually interested, which is exactly why I love it for our Screens campaign. Games like this create those tiny moments of connection that reset everyone's brain after a long day of school, homework, and way too much dang screen time. So if you're looking for a 10-minute family reset that actually works, check them out at tacocatgames.com or check them out in the show notes, because sometimes the best way to compete with screens is with doing something even more fun. All right, Chaos fam, today's episode is a big one because it officially kicks off our Screens campaign. Now, before anyone panics, this is not throw your kid's iPad into the lake and live in a yurt situation. No. We're practical people. Screens exist, screens help sometimes, and screens also buy us 10 minutes to drink a hot cup of coffee while no one is screaming. But here's the question we're asking in this series. What skills are quietly disappearing while our kids are on screens? What's happening in their beautiful little brains? And what it means to be raising kids in a technological age. Because when you talk to experts, and y'all know that's what we do around here, right? The conversation keeps coming back to the same thing. It's not just attention. It's social skills, flexible thinking, emotional regulation, perspective taking, frustration tolerance, the real life skills our kids already have to work twice as hard to develop. So if we're going to talk about rebuilding those skills, we're starting with an absolute legend in the space. Today, I am joined by Michelle Garcia Winner, speech language pathologist, internationally recognized social cognitive specialist, and the founder of Social Thinking, which has helped educators, therapists, and families around the world understand how their kids actually develop the skills that make friendships, conversation, teamwork, and everyday life work. Michelle has spent decades breaking down something most of us take for granted, the invisible social rules of the world, and turning them into teachable, learnable skills for our kids who may not pick them up naturally along the way. And that's what we're digging into today in this conversation. What are screens quietly stealing from our kids, and how the heck do we strengthen those skills before they fall too far behind? Grab your emotional support coffee, and let's welcome Michelle to the mic. Welcome to Chaos and Caffeine, the ADHD parenting podcast where you do not need a degree to understand your kid. I'm Danielle, mom in the trenches who spent years obsessing over how to do this better, so you don't have to learn everything the hard way like I did. Each week, I bring on experts who actually make sense. And then if you want the real story, come hang out with me on Patreon where I break down how it all played out in my house. What worked, what flopped, and what I'm still side-eyeing. Thanks for being here. Michelle, welcome to Chaos and Caffeine.
Thank you for the invitation. I'm glad to be here.
I am excited to have you. Before we jump into today's topic, you have a very interesting journey, and I would love it if you'd share it with our audience.
So I'm a speech language pathologist who had an innate interest in autism back in the 1990s, before we had a spectrum. And I was working in a grant-funded program at Indiana University where I had gone to get my master's. But before my master's started, I started volunteering in this program for autism. And at that time, those were individuals who struggled with learning language and in fact just struggled with learning. And I was working with adolescents, and we were teaching them skills for living in a group home and accessing the community. And we had a wonderful rec therapist who did all kinds of things with us. We went skiing with our individuals, and it was a great learning experience. And because they had such weak language skills, really learned to observe and really pay attention to what they might be thinking, how they were feeling, to just try to usurp any problems that might be emerging. So it was a wonderful experience, and I really loved the uniqueness of the autistic mind at that point. And then I ended up taking a job working in the high school district. I moved back to California, started raising my family because I'm from California. So I took a job in the high school district as a speech pathologist, and the high school students on the caseload were really angry. They felt like the past speech pathologists have always just made it seem like they were behavior problems and was always telling them they needed to behave. And so I started asking them about their experiences and what was confusing to them, or what did they notice and what did they not notice. And I started learning so much about what I could do for them, because one of the first things I was learning was that they don't observe. They exist in a space, but they really don't observe what's happening in that space. And they had a lot of language and some really sharp thinking in many ways, but their social thinking was not as tuned in. So I started by doing a lot of research, just reading like crazy. At the time, Asperger's syndrome had been defined, was in the research a lot. And one of the questions I had was, who decides who's on the spectrum, who's autistic or has Asperger's and who's ADHD? Because so many of my students were coming in with dual diagnosis. And so I would go to ADHD meetings and meetings for Asperger's, and I go, who decides? Like, what's the difference? And, there is really, even today, it's just ADHD and ASD are interwoven with each other. And in fact, I think even more so now. I was just reading that people with ADHD struggle with eye contact and struggle with, different parameters that we might have assigned to the autism spectrum before. And certainly the folks I work with have these complex, array of diagnosis, which usually ADHD, possibly ASD, definitely anxiety, executive functioning issues. From the beginning of my work, I worked with the person and not the diagnosis, because I found the diagnosis were too unstable. You go to another doctor, you get another diagnosis, but the person didn't change. So to this day, all of my work, I'm interested in what somebody has designated as a diagnosis. Whether I agree with it or not doesn't matter, because you don't disagree with a person about what they're experiencing. So social thinking is not just for me to teach someone social thinking, it's for me to try to understand how they engage in social thinking. Today I'll be seeing a 13-year-old who's a very complicated guy, and he really struggles with perspective taking. He's cognitive, he's really brilliant in the part of history he loves, but thinking about what another person is thinking is just so complicated for him. And he's a tricky one to educate, because he doesn't take perspective. That means it's very hard to engage in reading literature. It's very hard to engage in written expression. And so it's fascinating. His primary diagnosis, he has both, but really the primary is ADHD. So, I learned from my folks, and then I try to figure out what I can do to help them. And a backbone of social thinking is not just the traditional social, but the executive functioning, not only from an organizational perspective, but executive functioning from a social perspective, getting organized around friendship, making plans, understanding time within the social realm. So it's always interesting. I've been doing this for many, many years now and continue to have a caseload because it's never boring.
Indeed. Thank you for sharing that. I have a very, very funny, quick story that I would like to share with you. My son is 10 and he is in school and they're learning all of this slang. And one of the words that he described the other day, he was saying autistic, but he was not using it in the correct context. And I was like, hey, let's not say that. He said, why? What does it mean? And I said, well, let's look it up. So the other day, as a family unit, we learned that autism has 3 stages. And as I was listing the symptoms of each, he was like, Mom, that kind of sounds like me. So we self-diagnosed as a family the other day.
Right. But it is really tricky to separate those two. And the point may be to get diagnosis to secure services or funding. But I really encourage people to not just say, okay, now you're autistic, so now we do autism. I think helping people with autism has gotten really complicated because they got rid of Asperger's syndrome and PDD, NOS, and high functioning autism, which, all have problems with their terminology, but they just put everyone on the spectrum. And now they just say I'm on a spectrum, and you lost any definition into what type of learning. For me, it's really important. If someone's super literal, that's a very different need in terms of how we teach them than if someone has abstract learning but struggles to, understand the quick dynamics of social and all that.
Indeed. So you brought up a really unique perspective that I had not thought about it. This episode is part of our screens episode, and I am not here to villainize screens. I just want to say that. But you mentioned that you notice screens are stealing some of our social cognitive skills. Do you mind discussing that a little bit further?
The really interesting body of research that has emerged, and certainly from our experience, and when we mean screens, social media time, academic screen time, teachers are saying, what's my role? Kids are just staring at the screen. But one of the things that's emerging in all of this is an increasing discomfort with face-to-face communication. So all those kind of concepts and skills our brain took for granted in terms of meeting up with someone, saying hi, hanging out face-to-face, really listening to what a person is saying rather than, trying to dart your back to your screen. Those have all become much trickier. So we're seeing an incredible rise in social anxiety. We're seeing an incredible rise in depression for girls and boys, more prominent in the girls. We're also seeing incredible rise in risky or suicidal behavior. There's some very scary stuff going on. So it's not no screen time, but how do you manage that? And what are the messages you're getting from your screen? That you're not pretty enough, you're not smart enough. And of course, people on screen and social media are really, posting everything wonderful happening to them. It's not a place to say, I had an ordinary day, I was pretty bored, I don't have, or I didn't want to hang out or whatever. So there are definitely challenges that are consuming our students without realizing they're consuming challenges through some of the screen. And so now there's this big push. Well, there needs to be a big push to really help people engage in this face-to-face communication, social emotional connections that are face-to-face. And that's not only for students. Businesses are now saying, okay, we've got these highly tech-driven people, but they're not doing social problem solving. They're struggling with complex discussions with each other. And so this is, going all the way up into businesses going, we really need to be thinking about how to teach soft skills. Some companies have jumped in to that. And so it's an interesting time because screens are not inherently bad. I'm on them all the time, even for my work. We're on a screen right now to have this conversation, whether the audience won't see the visual on it. So it's really understanding, though, it's one thing as an adult who has experience in a world that actually started without screens. I remember when I got my first computer, I was already, an adult, versus someone who's never had that experience. And how do we help them? Who would think that you need to teach face-to-face communication? From me, I'm in my 60s. And now it's like, whoa, it's so important. And then the other piece that I don't see enough written about is the social anxiety. There's just, especially with our folks who have diagnosis of ADHD and ASD, that when you feel like you're not doing as well as other people are, because we always compare ourselves to others, to have a sense of self means you have to compare yourself to others. And then you see that, where am I in this? And you start to get anxious because you realize it's a relative weakness. You're not sure how to make it an okay or relative strength. And then you intuitively start feeling anxious about what you're not as strong at. And then the interesting thing about social anxiety is it pulls you inward. So when you're socially anxious, you start really focusing on your anxiety and watching yourself just become more and more anxious. And that anxiety then keeps you from focusing outward, which is the social observational, check in with that person, take perspective of them.
I just recognized something when you were saying that about screens escalating social anxiety. I'm not saying it's a blanket statement, but my kiddo definitely struggles with that. But I am lucky enough to where if I suggest going to the park, he always shoots it down. And I'm like, well, let's just go and see what happens. And if you don't like it, we can come home, and we're always there for 3 hours. So once he gets over that initial hurdle, it gets a little bit easier. But do you have any tips for parents who are facing that where it's not so easy to be pulled off of screens and back into the real world?
Well, I think it's kind of the reverse, where we used to do research on how helpful we could learn on screens. We have to do research on how helpful it is to have face-to-face interactions. I mean, we need to really encourage our kids, and that feeling of insecurity. Humans are vulnerable, and it's okay to be vulnerable. If you're not vulnerable, if you don't let people in, then there aren't people to help you or to relate to you. And so working on strategies to, first of all, just walk by and say hi to people face to face. That is really lagging these days, especially with these, from the younger 20s and down. When I'm on the hiking trail, they're the only people who won't acknowledge me. Everybody who's my age, somewhere in the midlife, everyone's saying hi, but boy, these guys, they look away. So if you don't acknowledge people, you don't open a door. If you don't engage in small talk, you don't engage in social curiosity and to figure out who to connect with. And so how to move from safety of screen, where everything can be controlled and you have minutes to think about what to post, to the immediacy of here and now, is what are the benefits of that? There is people in face-to-face interactions intuitively feel more connected from a social emotional point of view than people on screens. And so how to seek that feeling of the future rather than exist in the here and now in a safe place. That's what I call mental time travel. We recently, Jenny Sojat, who's another speech pathologist, and I came out with a book called Brain Hacks, and it's about executive functioning and feelings, and it's a pretty cool graphic novel. It's being received really well out there. But it really works on tuning into your feelings, a like-dislike scale, that not everything's wonderful or awful, and just tuning into yourself, your own feelings, being aware that it's okay to feel like you're crashing and find your way out of that, are all messages we need to be sharing. The other thing that might be more, that can also be really useful is our website, because we have so much free information on it. And one of the free things is we have a lot of free articles, and one of them is about the spirals of anxiety. So the spirals of success and the spirals of failure. And sometimes people say, you can't call that, adults will say, you can't call it the spiral of failure. And I've talked to my teenagers and they go, but that's how we feel when things don't work out. And so it just is a step by step, like, how do you succeed as awareness? It's using an inner coach. It's using strategies. It's reminding yourself you're going to be okay. Is part of that face-to-face communication, is to work on developing that spiral of success rather than trap yourself in the spiral of failure. At the end of the spiral of success, it has like 6 points on it. It's like, as you take that risk and engage with others, you teach your brain new skills. On the spiral of failure, when you don't engage, your brain is not learning anything new. Mm-hmm. So I had a teenager she was at first really like, I don't want to be here. And then we developed the spirals of success in this group of teens. But anyhow, she was like, well, this is her language. She goes, I'm not an idiot. I don't want my brain to fail. I need to work on these strategies to succeed. So we've created a lot of really practical tools that you can see in articles. So I think on our website, that article might be called The Spiral of Success or The Spirals, but you can learn about it. And you can also read we have many free webinars about our social thinking vocabulary, just helping to identify, like, think with your eyes. We don't use the term eye contact because we encourage observation. And awareness of yourself in the group. Is your body in the group? Are you reading the group plan? Are you using flexible thinking? So all this different language to just teach people what is, being social when it's not intuitive is something that we can help to explicitly develop awareness of, and then help people build skills around that awareness.
Are you tired of being the screen police? The constant negotiation, nagging, and fights over screen time? Girl, it's so exhausting. 2 frustrated ADHD parents who experienced the problem firsthand have created a solution that actually works. Screen Coach is a time management app that rewards good habits. Kids can earn their screen time by doing activities set by you, chores, homework, even brushing their teeth. You can allocate times for kids to access certain apps only or block all apps. Once it's set up, you can relax. There's no sneaky workarounds. Endorsed by psychologists, Screen Coach enforces those routines that help ADHD kids and parents thrive. They offer a free 30-day trial, and because you're part of the Chaos fam, you can even get a 5% discount after the trial. You can head to myscreencoach.com/chaos or click the link in the description and start building healthy habits for life. Parenting neurodivergent kiddos feels like trying to build IKEA furniture blindfolded sometimes. You know there's a manual, but it's all in Swedish. That's exactly why I want to spotlight Insight Family Market. They aren't another generic store. They're a curated marketplace built by someone who's literally been in the trenches as an educator and parent. selecting tools that actually make daily life more manageable for real families. From sensory-friendly clothing and adaptive tools to educational supports and wellness essentials, everything is chosen with a family-first mindset. No clinical jargon, no guessing what might help. What I love is that it's not about selling you a quick hack. It's about offering thoughtful, quality products that help create more calm, more confidence, and more actual functioning in chaos. Whether that's at mealtime, bedtime, homework, or quiet moments between the noise. If you are exhausted from chasing solutions and just want a place where the gear feels like it was picked by someone who gets it, Insight Family Market might be that stop on your journey. I love something that you said in there so much because my kid is a polar opposite thinker. It's either a really awful day or a good day. And we are working very hard on, it's just a bad moment. This is not, your whole day. We are working on that incredibly hard right now. So I love that you guys are working on the scale.
We have another tool for that. We have what I call a feelings journal. We take the feelings scale that is in the Brain Hacks book. Looks something like this.
Okay.
That teachers can post on a whiteboard, parents can hang up. But anyhow, it's in a shrunk down to a page size version. And then we have time across the day. So it kind of goes the okay line, time across the day. And then you get to map out your day of feelings. These are not, so I distinguish between feelings and emotions. Feelings are what you feel. Emotions are the words we use to talk about it. When someone's saying, I had a bad day, those are feelings, but they often get stuck. Our brain has a negativity bias, so we focus on what's gone wrong and we pay very little attention to what's gone right. So I was working with an engineer who was like, every day's a bad day, nothing's ever good. And so we started staying away from the language of emotions because that complicates things to just your feelings. And then him starting to notice there were some positive times in his day, which was amazing to him because he just felt like every day was just so awful. But he realized, oh, I like going to lunch with my friends. They're funny. And I like being part of this project. So that's a tool we use. Trying to think if that's available anywhere, this little feelings journal handout. But it's just very practical stuff, right? Meet people where they are and help them not settle in, but keep learning. So when you get Brain Hacks, you'll see that, it all anchors around this feeling scale and the like-dislike scale because these kids are going, it's awesome, it's awful, it's awesome, it's awful. And then we have these 4 characters that are in your brain's command center. One of them is FITTY, feel it, think it. We have one that's called R2I, which is about time travel. Imagine your future, remember your past to figure out what you're doing now. We have Gadget Guy who fills you up with strategies, and one more that I'm not thinking about right now. But anyhow, it's all just very practical, fun stuff to get kids to learn about how their brain works through this graphic novel.
Very nice. I am very late to social awareness or self-awareness even. So I am trying to help my kid along the way as I'm learning also. And I can't figure out if I'm hurting or helping or dragging him along before he's ready, or if it's another one of mom's woo-woo things that he thinks I'm coming in with.
Well, it can. So social thing is very developmental, right? Starting at what children are doing at birth to, a year old to 3 years old, 4 years old, 10 years old is a highly social age, right? They should be having friends that they like and friends, people who are less, and how to hang out. I was thinking today, as I'm working on something about recess, like people go, okay, it's recess, just go play. And a number of our kids are like, what does that even mean? Mm-hmm. So, some kids I work with stand around and just argue about what they will do. And they spend the entire time trying to out-talk the other person about what they should do at recess. And then the bell rings and it's over. So just there's so much, at 10 between recess time and work time. There's a lot of group work going on at this age, organizational skills. By fourth grade, the teachers are like, I'm not helping you anymore. You should know how to do all this. And so for some of our kids who've been really smart, factual learners and learning in their own terms, sometimes hit a wall because all of a sudden there's this orchestra of demands from a social and organizational perspective that are expected. So it's not uncommon to have kids realizing that they need help at this later age because they were able to hold it together while the teacher was guiding them enough before that.
You've mentioned a couple of times about executive functioning, and I find that most of our kiddos already struggle with executive functioning. When we are layering in heavy screen use on top of that, what tends to happen?
Well, I was thinking about that too. When you go to a screen, the screen usually guides you. It is your executive functioning. If you're a big game player, it's all set up for you. It tells you what your goals are. It takes you through these episodes. It provides, pitfalls and stuff, but that's your executive functioning. So there's this great relief on screen time because so much of it is guiding you as to what you do. When you go into the non-screen world, you need to guide yourself. So executive functioning always starts with a goal. So what's your goal? So at recess, if you decide you want to play or in class and you've got to work in a group, who do I want to work with? Start with your goal. And then you have what we call action plans, things you need to do to meet your goal. So let's talk about group work in a class because that's pretty popular. Most kids, when they come in the morning, neurotypical kids will read the room, and if the teacher says get in a group, they know exactly where they're going and who they're going to. Our kids sometimes go into a room, sit there, haven't really figured out who's around or who they want to work with, and when the teacher says get in a group, they just kind of sit there. Or they show distress because they feel overwhelmed by that. And so backing up to this group observation, think with your eyes, make a plan, right? If the goal is when the teacher says group work, who do you want to be with? Who have you worked well with in the past? How do you get over there, to them before that group fills up are some of the ways in which I just work with folks on break it down. But it always has to start with a goal. That's core to executive functioning. Action plans, and then how do you self-regulate your behavior, your feelings, and time to be able to carry out your action plans to meet your goal. And we do this constantly, all day long, different activities. But for our students who don't do it well, they look disorganized, they may look frustrated. And then we treat the behavior and not realize that their brain is struggling with this load of information.
My kiddo had a heartbreaking experience. I think it was last year where he was not chosen by his friends to be a work partner. And the children told the teacher privately that he wasn't able to follow through on the work. So I gave my own personal story of, I am terrified to speak publicly. I know that sounds crazy being a podcast host, but that was my nightmare, to stand up in front of the class and do the presentation. So knowing that, I had to step up and do the bulk of the grunt work because I was going to rely on my partner to do the heavy lifting in the presentation. So we kind of talked about that, and I'm not sure that he understood completely, but he did understand, I have to get some of the work done and be a part of the group. And hopefully that is going a little bit better this year, but I definitely see that social skill lacking.
And executive function, because the time prediction, when you do something, you've got to do it in time. And you've got to, so like when the group is saying he's not getting things done, he may be stuck in his mind on a thought, but he's not organizing that and then realizing I got to get this done within 5 minutes or 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And time prediction for our folks can also be a really big issue. If you're interested in this topic of executive functioning, we have a lot of information for free on our website, socialthinking.com. There's also 2 women on the East Coast who are phenomenal speakers on executive functioning, Sarah Ward and Kristen Jacobson. I believe their website is www.efpractice.com. So if you want to really hear some fabulous talks about executive functioning in a very practical way, I would also look to their work.
We can link, of course, social thinking in the show notes from your episode, but I will try to remember to put that one in there as well so that parents can have multiple resources.
Great. Yeah, it's a big topic. And, we take for granted. That's a big part about social thinking, is trying to show what we take for granted. And it typically was designed for ASD, ADHD, but now neurotypical kids, as you mentioned, with these screen time issues, more and more we've been teaching to all students. Some years ago, I ended up in a college class teaching college students about social and social emotional and how we think and feel about each other. And when we do something, the ripple effect comes right back to us. If we say something that's offensive, how do other people think and feel? How do they react and respond? How does that person then feel based on how people are reacting? And these college students were like, why aren't you teaching this to all of us? Like, we all need this information. We don't have the tools for getting into these complicated relationships.
Yeah.
So I think we can look at it broadly as, helpful sets of information for different age groups.
So if you don't mind, can we get practical? Because you've spent decades going over this work. And if we quietly reduce screen hours, how can we intentionally rebuild those social reps that screens have been stealing?
Well, I would not just reduce screen time, I would increase external activity. So one of the things I like to do with my students is have them go out into public, whether it's a coffee shop, a grocery store, whatever kind of store, just not a gaming store, and have them notice, like, be a spy. So for our younger kids, we teach them to be social detectives. For my older kids, I teach them to be social spies, and just notice who wants what, who came in together, who likes each other, who's avoiding talking to each other, and just start noticing the patterns of the world around you. So a big part of social thinking is notice before you do anything differently. And my students have taught me this over the years. I had this kid who I started when he was like 13, and he was gifted and went to a gifted school. But he said, everyone in the school is a jerk. Everyone in my school is a jerk. Ultimately, I got him to go into the cafeteria and, rather than just stare at his food, start noticing people, what they were doing, what they were saying to each other, how they behaved, what they do, during break time, what's happening in class during group time. And it took a while, right? He was a non-observer. He did not notice. He literally was like everyone was a jerk. But we spent a lot of time building a social observational lens and then making strategies. Okay, who would you like to join at lunch? How would you do that? What do you notice other kids are doing? Because there's 4 parts of communication. We notice, we have to establish physical presence. He always sat away from everyone. So he sent all these messages, don't be with me. And now he had to go join a group that he chose, that he would just be part of, physically there, and then start noticing what's going on in the group once you're there, and then you use language to relate. So we broke it all down. Anyhow, long story short, he learned all kinds of strategies. I was teaching his parents strategies, the importance of social observation. And after I worked with him until he was 18, and somewhere in those last years, he goes, "Oh my God, I thought everybody else was a jerk. And it turned out I was that person. I was the one shutting everybody down." And so, it's not often that clear. It was an evolution. But he was making all these opinions based on his own perspective. And as he learned to take perspective of others and then meet people where they're at, he started to then be able to develop some level of relationships all on his terms, right? I didn't say, you must go to this person, you must say something. But once you start observing, and then you start listening, and then you start noticing more about what you can do with others. I also work, with adults. So I more prominently now work with adults, mature adults who are between 30 and my oldest client has been in his 70s, who ended up getting the job they want, but being shut out of social activities, not being shut out, but not included because they were not being inclusive themselves. And how to help them meet their own goal is always what our work is about. It's never me assigning, here's your goal.
I had a very similar moment. My cousin actually very casually one day was like, "Oh, never mind, you're a loner." And I didn't say anything in that moment, but I was like, "I'm not a loner. I love hanging out with people. What is she talking about?" So it caused a self-reflection that was probably well needed for me to change my own behavior.
I meant to say something earlier, and that was it all starts with kind of just acknowledging someone else, walking by and saying hi. As easy as that sounds, it may not be easy. So I've learned to actually, if it's my kid or my client, we actually walk by each other and see if he knows how to say hi, because there's so much timing of it. Like, you have to notice the person, you get within a kind of an arm's length, you look up, you say hi, you move on. And so many of our screen-driven kids don't know how to say hi. And they may have only say hi to like their parent's friend. And so literally taking all this stuff, backing it up, there's no shame involved in it. You are learning to acknowledge others, because that's the doorway. If you walk with your head always facing down and looking away from everyone, or on your phone the whole time, you're missing all of these opportunities to build a connection. That's what schools have found when they've limited phone access in school, that kids started saying hi to each other. And they were like, "Oh my God, it's amazing." They're not looking, they actually notice each other. And that is a great place to start when you're starting to think about where you're not only observing, but once you start engaging, is looking up, acknowledging who you want to acknowledge. You don't walk by and go, "Hi, hi, 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 hi." You think with your eyes, who is this? Oh, there's this guy I worked with in class, that he's a nice guy. I'll just say hi. The first time you say hi out loud, you give a smile. Maybe the next time you pass them, you don't say hi out loud. You only do that once in the same day. And then you pass them 2 or 3 times, you might give a subtle nod or a hi, but after 3 times, you just don't even look at them, because once you've passed 3 times, you're good. Fascinating. We can break all this stuff down.
Very. So tell me if I'm on the right track. And of course, I'm not going to try to implement all of these in one day. But for my kiddo, I'm thinking, at first I was like, I'll try to get him to observe at the park, but that is going to be a lost cause. So then I thought maybe one day in school, like before we get out of the car, I say, "Hey, we pick one student today and you tell mom how their day was whenever we get home." Would that be social awareness building?
I think I would do more about, in your class, who's sitting around you. Do you know their names? A lot of our kids don't. They don't know who's sitting around them. They don't know their names. And I think I would start with like a common group thing of just like, do you know the names of the people around you? Who is there? Who would you like to work with? Kind of things like that.
Gotcha.
So that it's more part of their day. Or like, what do you do at break time? What do you notice? Who's there? You can also talk about like social observation. How's your teacher feeling today? How do you know that? What's your evidence? So I would do that more than one kid because that might almost seem a little stalking.
Got you. And then I thought another day we could try a challenge of say hi to someone and then tell me if you know that person or not, or if it was just like some random hi. Just start really small.
I would say that might be a little much for people because if they're not used to saying hi, they need to really observe people saying hi. Mm-hmm. So I always start with observe. Tell me how kids are saying hi. Show me how they do that. Because also culturally, hi to adults is very different than hi to a kid. So how do they do it? You be my spy. Tell me how kids are saying hi to each other at school. Come back.
Steps.
And report. You absolutely have to, because if you skip it, you kick them into social anxiety and that just backs them up into nowhere land.
Yeah.
Yeah, don't minimize power of social observation. We learn from the time kids are born, the first things they are learning is to observe, attend, imagine what other people are thinking, wonder. All of these things build into participation, friendships, conversational skills.
Very last thing, and then I want you to tell people how to connect with you further. It came to mind when you were talking about observing the classmates around him. He says that one kid in particular in class is the crybaby. And I thought, instead of telling mom, that this person is the crybaby, what made them cry? Could you observe? Could you be in tune with, what caused that emotional crying? Would that be an observation that we could work on?
Yeah, or get them to observe other people in class too. Some kids just are so fragile that it takes an adult to figure out what's going on, really, that the kid it's himself. Like if he could tell you that would be great. Some of our kids are way more complicated who are crying in class, but just ask them, okay, I got that on that one kid. Now tell me about the other kids in class. Always try to stretch their lens. Gotcha. And know what's going on. What you don't want to do is, what do people notice about you when you're getting upset? How do people think about that? That's way down the line.
Yeah. That I'm not even sure I understand yet. So let's not teach what I don't understand myself. So I know you've mentioned already your website and all of the amazing resources. And of course, we'll link that in the show notes. Are there any other ways to connect with you further out there that you want to recommend, or just the website?
My email's michelle@socialthinking.com. I'm very accessible. And if I get too many emails, I'll send them to one of my colleagues. But I welcome comments or questions.
Very last question. What do you think we're getting right in ADHD parenting in 2026?
Oh my gosh, just recognizing the uniqueness of your student and all they can do. It's not all about what they can't do. And there's a lot that our students can do. There's also some really successful, famous people who have ADHD. It is not a game stopper. But everybody, no matter how bright they are, have an area in their brain that needs to learn strategies. Nobody is intuitively born with a full toolkit and does everything well. Even if you think a kid is, that kid is feeling like there's something they've got to learn. So with ADHD, recognize all you can do and then lean in to learning strategies to help you so you can do more.
I love that. That was the perfect ending. Thank you so much for your time today. This has been amazing.
Thank you for the invitation. I enjoyed talking to you.
Phew. This conversation was incredible, truly. Because here's the thing that we need to hear. The goal was never to raise kids who could sit quietly and stare at worksheets all day. The goal is to raise kids who can navigate the real world. Friendships, conversation, frustration, teamwork, reading the room, repairing a mistake, and trying again. And what Michelle so beautifully laid out is that these skills aren't personality traits. They're not something our kid either magically has or doesn't have. They're learnable, they're coachable, and thank goodness they're buildable. And sometimes our kiddos just need someone to pull back the curtain and say, hey, here's what people are thinking, here's what they're expecting, here's how we figure that stuff out together. Thank you so much, Michelle, for dropping by and dropping your decades worth of knowledge on us, and for making it all make sense. If you want to learn more about Michelle and her work, check out Social Thinking in the show notes where you can definitely do a deeper dive. While you're there, be sure to subscribe so you do not miss another episode of our Screens campaign. Be sure to like, leave us a comment. I love reading those. And rate us 5 stars, obviously, for the algorithm gods. But so much more importantly, I need you to share this with another ADHD parent who's trying to figure this whole thing out. Truly, half the reason this podcast has grown the way that it has is because parents like you share it with someone else who desperately needs to hear it. That's it for this week on Chaos and Caffeine. I'm Danielle, and I will see you back here next week with a lot of the same chaos. Hopefully, for the love of goodness, more caffeine, but a lot more clarity. If you're a parent in the neurodivergent world, you already know this. We read labels like it's our second job. We side-eye ingredients, we Google brands at midnight, and we're constantly looking for support options that feel intentional and not sketchy. That's one of the reasons so many families, including my own, trust Mary Ruth Organics. Their supplements come in easy-to-take liquid drops, which honestly matters when pills are a hard no. The flavors are kid-friendly, the formulas are vegan, Clean Label Project certified, and the company itself is a B Corp, which means they actually care about what goes into their products and how they operate. Mary Ruth's doesn't promise miracles, and neither do we. What they offer is thoughtfully made, high-quality supplements that fit into real family routines without added stress. If you're looking for a brand that prioritizes transparency, clean ingredients, and making supplements easier for kids and parents alike, Mary Ruth Organics is one worth checking out. Because supporting our kids starts with choosing products we actually feel good about giving them.